Wyoming is the kind of place where silence feels normal. Wide land, long roads, and for decades, that silence has carried stories people were afraid to say out loud. One of those stories refuses to fade because it wasn't just strange. It was detailed. It was witnessed. And it nearly ended with a man vanishing without a trace. In October of 1974, long before smartphones and viral videos, something happened in southern Wyoming that still leaves investigators uneasy. Not because it sounds unbelievable, but because too many details line up too well to ignore. The man at the center of it was Carl Higdon.
What happened?
Don't know.
You don't know.
I don't know. It seems strange. You know.
You sure you're all right?
Yeah.
You're not hurting anywhere?
No.
Okay.
Get you out of here and get you to the doctor as soon as we can.
I went to pick up my crew to go to work, and one of them was sick, so we couldn't work. So I came back to the house and decided I'd go hunting. So I decided to go on down into the forest, and I hunted down there until, it must have been around 4 o'clock. So I walked down over this hill. Whenever I got over the hill, I seen these 5 elk standing down there. One of them was a big bull, so I raised my gun to shoot.
Carl wasn't chasing attention. He wasn't a thrill seeker. He was 40 years old, married, and working as an oil driller for AM Well Service in Riverton, Wyoming. On Friday, October 25th, he got an unexpected day off. No plans, no schedule, just time. So he did what many Wyoming men did. He went elk hunting. Carl loaded his pickup, grabbed his new 7mm Magnum rifle, and drove south toward McCarty Canyon, about 40 miles from his home in Rawlins. The drive was normal, quiet. On the way, he stopped to help 2 hunters whose truck wouldn't start. They shared coffee, talked hunting, and suggested Carl would find better luck deeper in the woods. That small detour would later feel like a strange checkpoint, one of the last normal moments before everything changed. Carl followed their advice and headed toward the northern edge of Medicine Bow National Forest. After parking his truck on a hill, he briefly spoke with a game warden who happened to be in the area. Around 4 p.m., with daylight fading, Carl began his hunt. He hadn't walked a full mile when he stepped into a clearing. That's when he saw 5 elk standing several hundred feet away. They were completely still, not grazing, not alert, not reacting to his presence. Hunters know animals don't freeze like that, not all at once, not without reason. Carl raised his rifle anyway, aimed at the largest male, and pulled the trigger. Nothing exploded. No gunshot. The bullet slid out of the barrel in slow motion, drifting forward as if time itself had thickened. About 50 feet ahead, it stopped mid-air, like it hit something invisible, then dropped straight into the snow. The elk didn't flinch. The forest stayed silent. No wind, no birds, no sound at all. Carl walked forward and picked up the bullet. That's when he noticed something impossible. Sitting on the ground was a large, transparent structure about 5 feet high, 5 feet wide, and 7 feet long. It looked solid but clear, like glass, empty, clean, out of place. Then Carl felt it, that unmistakable sense that something was behind him. When he turned, he came face to face with a humanoid figure floating upright above the snow. It was roughly 6 feet tall, wearing a black suit similar to a scuba diver's. The skin appeared human but unfamiliar. The face had no chin, a sharply pulled-back jaw, no ears, no eyebrows, and small, slanted eyes. Its straw-colored hair stood stiff and straight, clustered in small sections, with 2 rod-like objects rising from the top of its head like antennas. The being wore black shoes, a wide belt with a 6-pointed star at the buckle, and a yellow symbol on a small apron-like panel. Its legs bowed outward. Where hands should have been, there were none, only a cone-shaped device extending from its right sleeve. Carl later referred to the entity as a man, suggesting something about it felt deliberately human. Without moving its lips, it spoke. "Are you hungry?" Carl answered yes. A small packet floated toward him, 4 pills inside. Carl had always hated taking pills, but this time he swallowed one instantly, later saying it felt like his body acted without permission. The being then asked if Carl wanted to go with it. Carl said yes, not out of fear, but choice. He later explained he had read about UFO encounters before, and had already decided that if something like this ever happened, he wouldn't resist. The being pointed the cone-shaped device at him, and suddenly, Carl was somewhere else. He was seated inside the transparent box, restrained at the arms and head. The box itself sat inside a larger transparent structure. Through the reflection above him, Carl saw the 5 elk, again still frozen, enclosed like exhibits. The same being stood nearby, joined by 2 others just like it. Carl told them, "You've got my elk." One of the beings shrugged. The box lifted off the ground. Carl looked down and saw his truck exactly where he had parked it, until one of the beings waved its hand, and the truck vanished from sight. The next thing Carl saw was the earth, a glowing blue sphere far below him. The beings told him they were going home. A place they said was 163,000 light miles away. And then, without warning, the journey stopped. What happened next is where the story stops, sounding like confusion, and starts sounding deliberate. Carl said the first thing they did was place something over his head. It wasn't a mask. It wasn't smooth. It was a helmet with 6 wires sticking out in different directions, like it was meant to connect to something unseen. They tightened a strap under his chin. The moment it locked in place, everything went black. No fading, no warning. Then a sudden burst of light. So bright it felt like his eyes were on fire. They burned. They watered uncontrollably. Carl wasn't in the forest anymore. He wasn't lying down. He was upright, facing a transparent wall, staring into a massive open space that didn't appear to have walls, corners, or even a ceiling. Just endless distance. In the center of this space stood a tall tower, rising upward, narrow and sharp, with rotating lights circling its top. Carl later said the closest thing he could compare it to was the Space Needle in Seattle. That tower was the source of the light, intense, focused, and impossible to ignore. Below the tower, something even stranger caught his attention. People, adults and children, standing together, talking calmly. No panic, no fear, just casual conversation, as if nothing about this place was unusual. That detail alone would later haunt investigators. If this was chaos, why did it look so controlled? 2 entities escorted Carl along a long walkway toward the tower. One of them was the same being he had encountered earlier in the forest. This time, Carl realized he wasn't walking at all. He was floating. They moved him effortlessly through the space until they reached a doorway. Without being touched, the door lifted upward. Inside was a large room, wide and open. As soon as Carl was positioned inside, a flat object about 4 feet tall and 8 feet wide dropped down in front of him like a clear shield or wall. It stayed there briefly. Then it lifted straight back into the ceiling. No sound, no explanation. After this, one of the entities approached Carl and spoke plainly. "You're not what we want. We'll take you back." Just like that. No emotion. No hesitation. Carl was floated out of the room and back into the intense light. His eyes burned again. He was told the sun affected them the same way when they came to Earth. That detail would later resurface in ways no one could explain. Carl was then placed inside what he described as a craft. Inside, he encountered the same being from the forest, who now identified itself as Auzo-1. Auzo explained that it was a hunter just like Carl. It said its kind had been coming to Earth for many years, not to harm humans, but to gather food. Fish and animals were processed into small pills. One pill could sustain one of its kind for 4 days. Then Auzo explained why. Their ocean had turned yellow. All the fish had died. Their planet was failing. Auzo showed Carl a map of its world. Carl later noticed that the symbol on the map matched the same symbol displayed on Auzo's apron. Auzo explained that the 9 planets in its solar system supplied the magnetic force needed for their power and technology. The being also examined Carl's rifle. It appeared interested in it, and remarked that it would have liked to keep the weapon, calling it primitive, but said it was not permitted to do so. Auzo also explained that its kind wore black clothing to protect themselves from Earth's sun. After passing through what Carl described as a dark void, the craft returned to the forest. Auzo told him it would see him again. Then, suddenly, Carl was floating downward. As he descended, his foot slipped on a rock. He fell, rolled down a hill, and injured his shoulder. The experience ended as abruptly as it had begun. Carl followed a nearby road until he came upon a pickup truck. Strangely, he didn't recognize it as his own. He climbed inside anyway. He heard voices coming through the CB radio, but struggled to understand how to use it, despite having driven stick shift since he was young. When he finally made contact, the voice belonged to his boss, Roy Fleming. Fleming asked for Carl's name and location. Carl couldn't answer either. "I don't know," he said. "I am so cold." He described himself as being in a pickup with a funny stick in the middle. That first contact occurred around 6:30 p.m. Earlier that day, Carl's wife, Marjorie, returned home from work around 4 p.m. with a strong feeling that something was wrong. She felt an urgent need to get to her husband. When Carl's distress call came through the CB radio, she knew immediately it was serious. Carbon County Sheriff Charles Ogburn organized a search party, joined by Deputy Ed Tierney and 4 local hunters. Marjorie contacted her friend Marilyn James, whose husband Don drove them out to assist. Due to muddy roads, the sheriff's team struggled to reach the area where Carl's truck was believed to be. Marjorie and her group were instructed to wait on a nearby hill. While waiting, Marilyn suddenly noticed something in the sky, a large, moving light. It looked like a star, but it was changing colors red, green, and white. The group watched for nearly 20 minutes as the light moved in a wide arc, flashing brightly. At approximately 11:40 p.m., the search party found Carl. His truck was discovered about 3 miles from where he had originally parked it. It was stuck in a mud hole with no tire tracks leading to it. While waiting for the searchers to return, Marjorie and the others noticed a bright red-orange light rising in the eastern sky. They assumed it was sunrise. Only later did they realize the real sunrise came hours afterward. When Carl was returned, Marjorie immediately noticed something was wrong. He was confused. He didn't recognize her. When she spoke to him, he looked through her, as if she wasn't really there. When asked if he had shot an elk, Carl stared forward and said in a sing-song voice, "They took my elk. They took my elk." Carl was visibly cold. When Marjorie tried to place her coat around his shoulders, he recoiled in fear and cried out, "Don't touch me!" On the drive to Carbon County Memorial Hospital in Rawlins, Carl asked Fleming why he wasn't dressed in black. "Doesn't the sun burn you?" At the hospital around 2 a.m., Carl's eyes continued to water badly under the lights. His shoulder was painful. He repeatedly asked for pills that float to you. Doctors found no bruises, no broken bones, and no drugs in his system. Dr. R.C. Tonko diagnosed Carl with amnesic shock. When Marjorie asked him his name, Carl replied, "They keep calling me Carl. Who is Carl?" During his hospital stay, Carl struggled to remember everything, but described parts of the experience. Marjorie gave him a pencil and paper and asked him to write or draw anything he could recall. Carl drew the entity. He wrote one word: Enders. Later, a deputy sheriff revealed that another man named Enders had been in a different part of the forest that same night. Carl also drew a forked road, a rough sketch of the transparent craft, listed 2 unidentified addresses, and made a note about a truck. Carl Higdon was released from the hospital on the morning of Monday, October 28th. Carl believes that some kind of a medical examination occurred when the shield or wall dropped in front of him, and that he somehow failed the test. While Carl initially speculated that he was rejected due to the effects of the light on his eyes, he later suggested that it was due to his vasectomy. To Carl, it felt like that detail alone made him unsuitable. That idea may sound strange, but what followed makes it harder to dismiss. Before his encounter, Carl suffered from serious lung scarring and recurring kidney stones conditions that don't just clear up on their own. Yet after the incident, medical tests showed improvement. Real, documented improvement. The scarring was reduced. The kidney stones were gone. Doctors had no clear answer. No treatment explained it. No medication accounted for it. This is where Carl's story stops being an isolated case. Researchers studying UFO encounters have documented hundreds of similar incidents involving sudden healing. Over 300 cases point to people experiencing relief from long-term medical problems shortly after close encounters with strange objects or beings. These weren't faith healings or placebo effects. Many were confirmed through medical records taken before and after the events. What's unsettling is the pattern behind these healings. The beings involved are rarely described as kind or cruel. There's no sense of mercy or punishment. The healings appear deliberate, but not compassionate. More like a technician repairing equipment than a doctor caring for a patient. The conclusion many researchers reach is simple and uncomfortable. The healing may not be the goal. It may just be a side effect. And that brings us back to Wyoming. Nearly 35 years after Carl's encounter in a remote forest, another experienced outdoorsman vanished under eerily similar circumstances. Mark Anthony Strittmater had spent over 15 years hunting in the same region. He knew the land well. He wasn't careless. He wasn't inexperienced. Yet on October 19, 2019, Mark disappeared from an area he had never hunted before. That detail matters. Just like Carl, Mark was in unfamiliar ground, not lost, but out of pattern. And there was something else. On a previous hunt, Mark had reported seeing a black object in the sky. Silent. Solid. It followed him briefly before disappearing. At the time, he didn't treat it as a threat. He finished his hunt and went home. But that sighting would later take on a much heavier weight. Unlike Carl, Mark never returned. Another detail quietly connects these cases. Both men shared German ancestry, a pattern that appears again and again in strange disappearance cases. However, there was a key difference. Mark had never undergone a vasectomy. Whether that detail is meaningful or coincidental remains unknown. But when viewed alongside Carl's belief that he was rejected, it raises an unsettling possibility. What if some people are allowed to return, and others aren't? Historical accounts add another layer to this mystery. Long before UFOs were discussed in modern terms, people told stories of encounters with non-human beings, fairies, elves, and other entities that behaved in strangely familiar ways. Many of these encounters included a recurring detail: the offer of food. In old traditions, those who accepted food from these beings were rewarded with endless supply, or vanished forever, never returning to the human world. The warning was always the same: accept their gift, and you belong to them. Modern encounters echo this symbolism, even if the language has changed. Instead of food, people describe medical procedures, examinations, or strange interactions that feel transactional. Cooperation seems to lead to one outcome. Resistance or disqualification leads to another. Movement is another repeating detail that refuses to go away. Numerous witnesses describe entities that don't walk. They float, they glide, they hover just above the ground. In Mississippi, witnesses claimed creatures floated out of a landed craft. In Kentucky, strange figures reportedly hovered while swaying in unnatural motions. These aren't isolated stories spread across one culture or time period. They appear again and again, separated by decades and continents. Even the information given during these encounters often makes little sense. Some experiencers describe distances in incorrect terms, like measuring space in light miles instead of light years. Others are told the beings come from vague or impossible locations, like a third galaxy. These descriptions are scientifically meaningless, but their repetition suggests something important. The information may not be meant to be accurate. It may be meant to be accepted. When Carl's account is read in full, a troubling interpretation emerges. It feels less like a visitation and more like a failed transfer, as if he was supposed to be taken permanently, but something caused the process to stop. A rejection. A decision. And that rejection may have saved his life. Because if cases like Mark's disappearance are connected to the same phenomenon, then the line between survival and vanishing may be frighteningly thin. One detail, one condition, one unknown rule. So when Wyoming authorities say they're stunned by what was captured on camera, they aren't reacting to a single object in the sky. They're reacting to the weight of what that object might represent: a system, a process, and a pattern that stretches across time. Some people come back healed, some don't come back at all. And the most disturbing part isn't what was seen flying above Wyoming. It's the growing sense that whatever is behind it has been watching, testing, and deciding for a very long time. But before we leave, I have this video that's keeping me up. Do you think it's real or fake? The footage that sparked all of this wasn't captured in Wyoming itself. It was filmed in Farmington, New Mexico, just after 3 a.m., when most of the town was asleep and the streets were quiet. But here's where that explanation starts to wobble. The object doesn't behave like a normal reflection. It holds its shape. It stays steady. And more importantly, it appears to exist independently of the camera's movement. Reflections usually shift or distort when the phone moves. This one doesn't. So is it real?